Well, hi there once again. Here it is another day, and it's time for Unstoppable Mindset. We have a wonderful guest today. I got to meet a couple of months ago. Her name is Penn Street. Penn is short for Penny, but we're going to call her Penn because that's what she seems to like. And she hasn't hit me or anyone else yet for calling her Penn, and she seems to be pretty used to it, so we'll stick with Penn. And she has an interesting and I think a great story to tell, and we'll get to all of that. But Penn, welcome to Unstoppable Mindset. We're really glad you're here.
Thanks, Michael. I really appreciate it.
So, as we were talking about just before we started, you are one daughter among 6 or 7 other boys, right?
Actually, there's 3 girls and
now there are 3 girls. Oh my gosh! But you were the first girl.
No, I was the second. So
you were the second.
Yeah, my parents had 2 boys, and then they had a girl, and they really, really, really wanted another girl. So they had 5 more boys, and then I was born. And so story says that my mom looked at me and said I was her lucky shiny penny. So she wanted to name me Penny. And then, so that's the second girl. And then my little sister, almost 3 years later, came and was a complete surprise because my mom thought and dad thought I was it, but my little sister came along, which I was very thankful for, because imagine, a little girl with 7 older brothers. It was a little unfair at times.
Well, and an older sister.
Yeah, but she was so much older than me. It felt like, she was my babysitter, which she sort of was.
So what was your younger sister's name?
Sherry. And she was actually named after my oldest brother's girlfriend at the time, because he found out my mom was pregnant, and his first girlfriend, he thought it would be really cool to say, oh, my mom, really likes you. She's going to name the baby after you. And my mom really didn't have another girl's name. So Sherry is out there somewhere. My little sister actually was named after you.
Wow.
Yeah.
So older brother and Sherry didn't stay together.
Not. I doubt if I don't know how long they teenagers, who knows?
Yeah. Well, there is that. Well, so you've had, needless to say, an interesting life, which we'll talk about as much as you want, but you grew up like any kid, and then went to school, I guess, and did all those things that kids do. But then things changed for you at the age of 9.
Yes, they did. I was bit by a Western diamondback rattlesnake, and actually it bit me twice, and then it bit my little sister, Sherry.
Oh my gosh.
But I took the bulk of the venom, which was a good thing because she was smaller than me. So but yeah.
So where were you guys where you weren't supposed to be?
That is another story. But we were in the woods of Arkansas. And actually Arkansas has several super venomous snakes, which are definitely not my favorite animals. But yeah, I was bit. They gave me, antivenom. They gave me all the right medication to save my life. But in doing so, it triggered a syndrome called Stevens-Johnson syndrome, which was named after the 2 doctors that came up with the name Stevens and Johnson. And it's a severe, adverse drug reaction. And at that time, the fatality rates for children was 75%. And you're treated in a burn unit, just as if you've been in a fire, because your body, the way it reacts to the drugs is it burns from the inside out. So all of my organs were affected. 75% of my body was covered in 2nd and 3rd degree burns. So you can imagine, in a fire, all the soft tissue is compromised. And of course, your eyes are nothing but soft tissue.
Yeah.
So the eyes were definitely the obvious. But yeah, I was a tomboy. I mean, with 7 older brothers, I had to be strong, right? I never would have survived those first 9 years if I wasn't a tomboy.
Yeah.
And I didn't understand what was happening, but you're a kid, you just kind of this is what's happening today, and I'll get through it, and then tomorrow will be better. And, every day that I survived, the chances of me, living increased. And then I really did, especially at that time, because I didn't know a lot about Stevens-Johnson syndrome. They really thought that I would be totally blind, deaf. My fever was above 103 for many, many days. So they thought that I would be cognitively impaired. I'd be on a feeding tube. I would never be able to breathe on my own, all those things. But, as I fought, they, unchecked those boxes from my future. And yes, everything is compromised. Obviously my vision is compromised and hearing is compromised, those kinds of things. But really, I don't look at those things as a disability. To me, my disability is my heart doesn't like to keep up with my lifestyle that I like to do, or my lungs. So I like to climb mountains and, downhill ski. And I like to do all these things that require a good health. So my heart's not very happy with me most of the time, but neither are my lungs. But it's my life. I appreciate every single day that I have. And just like when I was a kid, I look at, oh, today is today, and tomorrow will be better. And it always is.
I bet, however, that your older brothers were supportive.
They were. I think that they were threatened with their lives, that when I did finally get to come home, that they were supposed to treat me different. Don't tease her, don't roughhouse with her. She's very fragile. And I was extremely fragile. But behind the scenes, when mom and dad weren't there, they didn't treat me exactly like they did before, but I did appreciate more than they will ever know, those big brother, kind of pushes and shoves and calling me a dork and stuff like that, because it made me feel like me again.
Yeah.
Because I didn't look like me anymore. Imagine a burn victim. And, I didn't move around quite as fast, especially in the beginning, until I had those skills, the cane skills and, those independent skills that I had to learn. But they, it was what it was. And my little sister and I became super close. Actually, probably closer than we were before, because I was forced to be inside a lot more. And unlike me being the tomboy, she was the little princess, and she loved playing with dolls and wearing pink and all those kinds of things. And I think she really liked having me sort of forced into being inside more. And so we got to know each other more. And, she and still is, my absolute closest friend on the planet.
Now, were you from Arkansas originally?
Yes,
okay.
We were. But I was 12. It became apparent that in Arkansas, yes, they had a great children's hospital, state of the art, that saved my life, but they really didn't have a lot of other resources and services after that initial, hospitalization. And so my parents found out about the Children's Hospital in Denver, Colorado. And it was definitely at that time, the leader in working with children and illnesses and all those kinds of things. And then also just resources, they didn't really have blind teachers, blindness was looked at very differently in Arkansas than it was in Colorado. And there weren't a lot of teachers and resources and services. And my parents knew that I was going to need those. So they packed us up and moved us to Colorado, which I'm very thankful. I love Colorado. And so I was given a lot better care here, and definitely a better education.
So what do your parents do for a living?
So they're both gone now. But my father was a millwright, and he worked for a union. So he worked at power plants all across the country, had a very specific skill set. And my mom, when we were young, she was a stay-at-home mom with 10 kids. It's hard to get a babysitter to take that on. But as we got older, she actually went into healthcare and worked with seniors, and was a healthcare provider for seniors. So it kind of runs in my family, the work that I do, I think, in my blood.
Well, you certainly did come out of it, and certainly your tomboy attitude, saying it facetiously or not, certainly had to help, because you had to survive, and you learned how to be a survivor. And certainly Stevens-Johnson made you into a survivor, which is important. And that, of course, is a characteristic and a trait that is second to none, that you certainly don't want to live without.
That's true. That's true. I really do love my life. It always angers me when people feel sorry for me, or like they say, "Oh, I'm sorry." I'm like, don't be sorry. I love my life. I do wish my heart worked better, and I do wish I wish my lungs worked better, but it's besides those things, like and even those things, it is what it is. And
it is what it is.
Yeah. And they're part of who I am. And I like who I am. And, not that I love learning and growing, and I love learning different ways to approach situations. And I'm always a sponge when I'm around new cultures and things like that. So it's not like, this is it, I'm happy with the way I am, I'm going to stay right here, because I'm not. I have a lot more to learn and to experience in this world, but there is nothing to be sorry about, or,
Well, when you go into kind of an overexertion mode, if you will, what does your heart do? How do you notice it? Or does it just yell at you and go, slow down? Or
no? Well, here I actually right now I have a pretty crazy heart monitor on. A week ago last night, I ended up in the emergency room in Durango, Colorado, because my heart decided it didn't really want to work anymore. And it goes from 100 to 0. So I was out hiking that weekend. I had been paddleboarding and camping in the mountains of Colorado, and I was over a friend's house in Durango, Colorado, and we were about to have dinner, and sitting on the couch and totally blacked out. And it woke up in the ambulance, which unfortunately is not abnormal for me. But so we're going to see what's going on right now. There's definitely an infection going on, and they don't know what that is, but whatever needs to happen to get me back outside.
Thoughts and prayers are with you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, it's interesting, and you're right. We all have gifts. We all have challenges.
Yeah.
And it's like anything. As I tell people talking about September 11th, we couldn't prevent it. And I'm not convinced that even with the September 11th report, I've not seen enough evidence to say that we could have foreseen it happening. But the issue isn't that it happened. The issue is how we deal with it. And you're facing the same sort of thing every day, every day, as we all are.
Yeah.
We have challenges, and the issue is we either deal with them and we grow and become better, or not. And that's our choice.
Yeah, absolutely. People, even right now, they're like, "Oh, you have to rest. You have to," and I am resting. This one was pretty scary, and it was still so recent, but I'm like, if my heart wants to blow out or my lungs want to give up, I'd rather be doing that standing on top of a mountain, or, rafting a river, or, doing something that I love, and instead of sitting on a couch. But that's the way I am. I'm not saying that's the correct way. Other people may totally disagree with me, but it's my life, and that's the way I want to live it. And
and you can decide when you want to not be so active on any given day. That's your choice.
Absolutely. All of us have that choice. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. We all have that choice. So how did school go for you after that? After Stevens, Johnson, and so on?
Actually, really well. I don't know where it came from, and I don't know. School was always easy for me. Not that I'm the best student. I don't have a super IQ. I don't know what my IQ is, but school was always really easy to me. I always looked at it sort of as a puzzle or a game, depending on what the teacher needed or wanted from me. That's what I gave them, which got me good grades. And it always worked for me. I was always a good problem solver. And so whenever I got a new teacher, which was, every year or every quarter, whatever grade I was in, I really studied the teacher and what they needed and wanted. And that's what I gave them. And so even though because of, my bad, bad health or whatever you want to call it, I was kept home a lot. I don't think I went a full week of school when I was finally allowed to go back to school. I think if I hit 4 days a week, actually being in, my butt in the seat in the classroom, that was rare. But I made straight A's. I was always on the honor roll. Even in college, when I went to university, I made the dean list. I worked full time. It was, I don't think there's anything special or gifted about me. It's just the way my brain works. And I learned what it took to get good grades, and that's what I did. And I was disciplined about it, and I did my work when I was supposed to do my work. And it just worked out for me, Michael. It was, I did go through public school. There was a time in middle school that my parents were concerned because I started, started getting teased and all that kind of thing. And they were concerned about my mental health, but, and I did, they allowed me to go, research it. And I even did some visits with a couple different schools, and it just, it didn't feel right. I wanted to be in the public school system. And it wasn't just because that's where my friends were. It's just, that's what felt like what I needed. And
so what year was this? What years were you in high school?
I graduated in 87.
Okay. So you, I never had any of the real teasing and bullying growing up as a blind kid. Of course, we lived in Palmdale, which was a pretty rural area, about 65 miles north of Los Angeles. But I know that over time, I guess more and more bullying happened. So maybe there was more of it when you were in high school than even I experienced. Of course, it's a whole different ball game now with all the things that exist. But
I can't imagine now.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to be a kid now. It's got to be so challenging.
Exactly.
But I was very fortunate that I didn't really have a lot. I did have issues. I was denied access to the school bus for a while in my freshman year of high school because we had a bully of a superintendent in the district. We had a rule that said no live animals allowed on the school bus, which I understand. But there's a state law that said that blind people with guide dogs could take their dogs anywhere that the public could go. And under case law, that included me taking my dog on the school bus. Well, the superintendent didn't care. And so I was actually denied. And when we got a board meeting about it at the local school board level, the board sided 3-2 with the superintendent, even though we showed them what the law said. And it actually took reaching out to the governor of California, who was at that time Edmund G. Pat Brown Jr., to get it reversed. And the superintendent then left us alone. But it took that level to make it happen. But it was a great lesson for me because I learned that you can fight City Hall and win, but you got to do it for the right reasons.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That is crazy to me. And it's ignorance, right? But I always wonder where did that always want to sit down people like that superintendent, and it's like, where is this coming from?
It, from everything I knew about this guy, it was, you do what I say and that's all that matters. And so I don't know, but that's what I heard. But, you certainly went through a lot. What did you major in college?
Special education and journalism.
Oh my gosh, that's two divergent majors.
Yes, I always wanted to be a writer. But I feel like I was really lucky that I always had amazing mentors. Not every teacher was amazing, but I always learned something from each one of them. But there were a few really big standouts. But I always had these people in my life that were just really awesome role models for different reasons. But one of the things that I think my mom, she was a very caring person, and she was a big believer. We went to church and things like that. And I always saw her giving, whether it was like, taking soup to somebody who was sick, or we had a neighbor who across the street who was in a wheelchair, and my mom would go over and, just do chores for him, not get paid. She just did it because she was a good person.
She wanted to.
Yeah. And we didn't ever really talk about it, but it really instilled in me that there are really awesome people out there, and whenever you can give back, you should. And as a kid with a disability, I was given things, and I was given opportunities that my other siblings weren't given. I got to go to summer camp. None of them got to go to summer camp. I took bowling lessons, nobody else in my family took bowling lessons. So there was always these opportunities. And so as I got, even in high school, I was given the opportunity to be a teacher's assistant in the special needs class. And all of the students that were in there, had different abilities. And I loved it. And they were my tribe. I didn't think of them as being any different than me. And I think that's why we all got along. And then I became involved with a program. It's called Cooper Home, where seniors in high school that had various disabilities could go there Monday after school. And then they would come over, and then, so Monday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night, Thursday night, they would come over after school, and we would teach them independent living skills, transportation, all the things that they needed to be successful when they went, left home after they graduated high school or went on to school or whatever they were going to do. And again, I just loved it. Teaching was fun to me. It filled my cup. And I always learned, I think I learned more from them than what I was teaching them. And it was just a give-take situation. And I really, really liked it. And so that's why I wanted to be a teacher, but I also loved writing. And so, so it just made sense that was the direction that I thought I was going to go with my career.
Well, that's what you get.
Think we know our best, right? When we're 18.
That's what you get for thinking, right? Yeah. Now, are you totally blind?
No, I'm not. My right eye is prosthetic. I finally made the choice a few years ago. It was an eye that was not usable. I had no vision, and it hurt. But I hung on, someday I'm going to be the bionic woman, and they're going to come up with the bionic. And I was like, why am I wasting all this energy being in pain with something that it's just pain? And so I had it removed. And then my left eye, I have a little peripheral on the left-hand side, but it's fuzzy. It's super fuzzy. That's what I call it, fuzzy.
Got it. Yeah, I was just curious to put it in perspective. But
Yeah.
you went on to college, and that was certainly cool. And you certainly seem to have a very positive attitude about you and about being blind and so on. You don't pity yourself. Why do you think that is?
It's exhausting to feel sorry for yourself, I think.
Good idea. Good answer.
I don't know. I think it's it was my parents, it was my teachers, it was, I think even before I got, Stevens-Johnson syndrome, I had to learn to sort of pull up my bootstraps and again, I do think it was having 7 older brothers. Even though I was way smaller than them and could never keep up with them, they expected me to, like, oh, you can climb to the top of that tree. You can, jump your bike over that obstacle. So I think I was always pushing myself physically and mentally, that I just kept doing that, and, and again, that problem solving and, and my mother was visually impaired and hearing impaired. And when she was a young child, she got very ill. It was from a medication. They think that possibly she had Stevens-Johnson syndrome, but not as, as a ferocious of a case as I had. But at that time, they didn't call it Stevens-Johnson syndrome.
Yeah.
And so she, just growing up with a mother that was visually impaired and hearing impaired, she didn't drive, but boy, could she ride the bus, like, or walk across town through alleyways and that I didn't even know existed, right? And she was a really good example of, okay, you can't hear well, you can't see well. Well, then you walk. You use what assets you do have, and you strengthen those. And it was, I think it was just part of my DNA that
well, certainly good for you. How are all your older brothers today?
I've lost 2 of them, and the oldest one passed away. He was actually at the very tail end of Vietnam. They think that it was some of the war things that happened to him, that he didn't live a very healthy life when he came home either. And then my brother, who's just older than me, Tim, he was my Superman. He, the three of us, Tim, Sherry, and I, we were a little, the 3 musketeers, and we always stuck up for each other. And he, esophagus cancer runs in my family. And so he passed away with esophagus cancer. I have 2 other brothers that are still alive that also live with, the effects of esophagus cancer. And then my father's mother, my grandmother, passed away with esophagus cancer. So
I'm sorry to hear it.
Yeah, but they, I'm not real close to my other brothers, even though there wasn't a huge age gap between us. It was just enough, but my little sister and I are very close. She lives in Colorado too. So we get together as often as we can and at least send a funny emoji or some goofy text every single day. So
my brother and I were 2 years apart, but clearly very different. He was not blind. And so we weren't as close as we could have been. We did communicate, but still definitely different lives. So I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
And sometimes you're just not as close. And at the same time, they're still your brothers. And so it's still part of you in every way.
Yeah. I posted, I'm on TikTok, and I posted a video about bullying, I don't know, a month or so, maybe it's been 2 months now. And one of my older brothers who lives in Kansas, he posted, like, if anybody messes with my little sister, they have to come through me. and then at the end he goes, well, what am I saying? No, she can probably kick your butt, probably more than I can at this point.
Good for him.
Yeah, but it was still nice to have him.
What did you do after college?
So I met my husband, Moses, and
good to have one of those around.
Yes, it is. He is a professional photographer, so the complete opposite scope as I am as far as visual goes. And he, we, I always say he had two little girls, and I always tell people I fell in love with the girls, and then he was just the icing on the
He
cake.
just happened to be there.
Exactly. So and a lot of it was because of meeting Moses. My life really changed. My career changed. What I thought I was going to end up doing in life changed. I was a really good salesperson, and I think it's because of my positive attitude, and if I'm passionate about something, I can sell. I can sell it. And so he was looking for a studio and gallery manager, and even though I was visually impaired, or low vision, or whatever term you use, I really believed in him, and I believed in what he was doing. He has a philosophy with photography that how you look in a photograph has nothing to do with how you look or the makeup you're wearing or the hair or the clothes or whatever. It has to do with how you feel.
Mm-hmm.
And if you feel beautiful, if you feel strong, then that's the way you come across in the photograph. And so that whole philosophy is of his. I bought it hook, line, and sinker, and it was something I could sell. And boy, did I. We had decades of a very wealthy lifestyle because of that. And it really changed lives. People would come in that, it could have been their wedding was coming up, or, whatever the event was. And they would take this photo class, and then Moses would do the photo shoot, and their lives would really be changed because of it. And it's things that, it's not like you come in and you do it and then you can't redo it when you're home or when you're with your family or your community. He actually taught you how to use the skills so that you could go on and be photographed by your Uncle Joe, or the local newspaper, or whatever it was, and you could still use those tools. And so it was a concept I really appreciated. And yeah. And
Well,
so I went into sales, and I managed our studio and our gallery for decades. And then we kind of hit this point. I lost another big chunk of vision overnight, and I was like, it's time for me to I really miss the teaching and the writing, and I miss working with people with disabilities. And so we made the decision that I went through Division of Vocational Rehabilitation, and, sort of sharpened all those skills.
Talk about needing to be a survivor, but go ahead.
Yeah. Don't get me started.
Yeah.
But and then I put my resume out there and got scooped up by a nonprofit, and the rest is sort of history. I do get to write now, and I work pretty much specifically with people who are blind and visually impaired, but I've had several opportunities to work for amazing organizations that I've gotten to travel and meet extraordinary people and do, really life dream things. Like I got to raft the entire Grand Canyon with a group of high schoolers that were blind, low vision. And one of them actually was profoundly deaf as well. And boy, was that an experience of a lifetime, and loved every moment of it. So we don't make, I work for a nonprofit, so we're not making those huge dollar amounts that we did when we had the studio and gallery, but life is just as rich.
But Moses is still doing okay.
He's semi-retired, and he probably does, I would say, maybe a dozen jobs a year, but that's fine. It's fine. We like where we are. We have a beautiful life.
Well,
No,
if you ever have to, just point out to him that no matter what he says, it may be that pictures are worth 1,000 words, but they take up a whole heck of a lot more memory.
they do. I like that. I'm gonna have to tell him too.
Yeah, I saw that once a few years ago. I thought it was great. Well, I do figure I might as well, since you brought it up. I do like to use the term low vision as opposed to visually impaired,
Yeah.
and I'll tell you why. I've talked about it a few times here, but I think there are two problems with the whole terminology of visually impaired. First of all, deaf people would shoot you if you call them visual or hearing impaired.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Because they have recognized that they shouldn't be compared to a person who can hear. And if you say impaired, you're immediately putting a stigma. And the same with visually impaired. Yeah. But the other problem with visually impaired is visually, we're not necessarily different just because we don't see.
Right.
And
we look.
Some of us look exactly the same. Some of us not necessarily, but that's why low vision is so much better. And we've got to get people into the habit of trying to stop comparing us.
Exactly. Yeah. I interviewed you for my podcast, Aftersight, and we had this discussion. Yeah. So we have a hike coming up, and I actually purposely made sure that I put low vision instead of visually impaired. And I've been trying pretty much daily, trying to get my team where I work to use low vision instead of visually impaired.
Well, it makes a lot more sense.
It does.
I mean, you could make the case that low vision isn't fair because so we don't see good, we got lots of vision, but yeah. I can cope with that, because eyesight and vision are so closely equated. And I don't think you're going to get rid of that one, but visually impaired is a ridiculous thing anyway. Yeah. But so you're working with nonprofits, and you mentioned Aftersight, so we should talk about that some, because you have a nice, successful podcast, and that seems to be going pretty well.
Yes. It's called Aftersight, and it's all one word. And when I started working as the development and outreach director for the nonprofit Audio Information Network of Colorado, here in Colorado, they had a previous podcast. It was called Community Conversations, and they hadn't had it in several years. And so they asked me if I would, bring it back to life. And I did, but I didn't really like community conversations. I wanted it was so broad. I wanted something. Yeah, more.
It doesn't mean anything necessarily anymore.
What does that mean? It sounds, I don't know. It just didn't strike home to me. And so I went to, the executive director and the board, and I said, I really like doing the podcast, but I would like to be more focused. And, since we work, our resources and services that we're providing here are for people who are blind and low vision, it should be about vision loss. And that's my wheelhouse, right? And I know a ton of people that have incredible stories and incredible resources, incredible services. And that's where I would like the focus to go. And so I actually, with my grant manager and I were brainstorming, and he's the one that came up with Aftersight, because I often say there is life after sight, after losing your vision. And so it stuck. And so that's why it became Aftersight. And I do love doing it. I've met so many just amazing people worldwide through it, and it became so successful that it was becoming a little overwhelming to keep up with, along with my my regular duties, being development director and doing outreach. And so they hired a podcast producer, Jonathan, shout out to you. And Jonathan really took it to the level where it is now. And because he knew he had the skills, and so he brings on just amazing guests. And I do, throw him a few people that I know, like you, Michael. I had your name on my list for quite a while before our mutual friend Kevin, introduced us again. Yeah. So,
well, and it was fun doing that podcast, and and I hope that people will seek out Aftersight as well. How long have you been doing the podcast now?
2 years now.
Wow. Okay.
Which is,
yeah, we're coming up on our second year in August.
yeah.
I've reached out to a lot of people on LinkedIn who have expressed interest in being on the podcast. And because of that last year, we've gone to 2 episodes a week.
That's amazing. We had talked about that, but I'm like, I can't.
Yeah. Well, it's fun to work at home.
Yeah.
So I'm able to do a lot of that. You're actually the second person today that I've had the opportunity to have an interview with,
oh,
but
wonderful.
It's fun to do. And like you, I love learning, and I've learned a lot from every person who I have the opportunity to talk with.
Yes.
And so it's so much fun. Now you use a guide dog, as I recall.
I do, which he barked earlier, which I'm glad he isn't doing now.
Well, as Jonathan could probably tell you if he edits podcasts, you could actually edit that out without any difficulty. There is technology today to do all that kind of stuff. It's pretty amazing. But what made you wait so long to start to use a guide dog?
Well, because of the Stevens-Johnson syndrome, I don't have any, or I shouldn't say I don't have any, but I have very little mucous membranes. And so breathing in dog hair is not, I mean, I will occasionally on special occasions, I'll do it, but I usually pay for it in the end. But so I never thought I could have a guide dog because I only knew of shepherds and labs. And so I never really researched it. And then a friend said, Penn, I saw this article about they're using standard poodles as guide dogs. And I was like, you gotta be kidding me. And as a kid, I loved dogs. And so I had the miniature poodle, little Behringer. And then even when I met Moses, his oldest daughter, who, is my stepdaughter, she really wanted a dog. And so we got a Bichon Frise, which again is hypoallergenic and they don't show. And so I don't think I'd ever even seen a standard poodle. Like I couldn't picture these little poodles being big enough to guide me around. I'm 5'9", so it's like I didn't, but I did some research and at that time, the Guide Dogs for the Blind out of California they had a poodle program. So they went through their whole thing where they come out, they do the Juno walk and all that. But then every poodle that came up got reassigned to something else. And they finally gave up on poodles. But they referred me to pilot dogs, which is where I met you, Michael, for the first time so many years ago. They referred me to pilot dogs because the executive director at Pilot Dogs at the time really loved standard poodles. And they actually had a pretty big, vibrant program. And so that's how I ended up there. And my first 2 guide dogs was through Pilot Dogs. And then I went on to my last 2 dogs have been from the Guide Dog Foundation for the Blind out of Smithtown, New York.
Smithtown, New York, right.
Yeah. So
all poodles? All
poodles. I did try, what are they called? The poodle lab crosses.
Labradoodles, yeah.
Labradoodles. But I was still enough allergic, like there was still lab enough in there that it wasn't a good match.
I have to be careful how I say this because there's somebody over here on the floor listening, but so the story goes, poodles are about the most intelligent dog there is.
They are.
So
which is
hopefully he's not going to bite me for that.
But that's sometimes not a blessing because they are so intelligent that they can be stubborn, and you really have to be the alpha dog 24/7 because they will test you. You have to have a certain, and there's that tomboy attitude, right? But I've been very, very fortunate with my dogs, and every time, well, Michael, they don't live that long, and it drives me crazy. And they definitely don't guide as long as we would like them to. And so the last one, I was like, this is it. I'm going to go back. I'll just be a cane user. Like, I'm fine. I have good cane skills. And, but here I am. And so now with him, he's 9.5. And I have a feeling Guide Dog Foundation will send out their trainer to do his evaluation in the spring. And they'll be like, I think it's time. Because he has slowed down a lot, and he's got some arthritis in his hips and that kind of thing. He's healthy. He's
but still,
awesome, but it's not fair to him. And I'll keep him though.
Sure.
I will not, even though I have a list of people like, oh, I'll take him. I'm like, no. But I'm thinking he might be my last guide, but I thought that last time, so I should be.
I don't know. I wouldn't,
open to whatever.
I agree. I think the issue is that these dogs love to work, and they would work till they drop. And so it's up to us, as you said, to be the alpha dog, but also to be the real team leader and understand when it's time to retire.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that you shouldn't get another one. It just means you're going to develop new memories. We had a cat. My wife had a cat named Bojangles, and Bo was a, she lived to be, I think, almost 15, but she, so when I got married to both of them. And when she passed, the vet said, don't wait a long time to get a new cat. Remember, you're not replacing the memories or the cat. You're going to create new memories. And I've always told that to people, both getting animals after one died and also just dealing with guide dogs and so on. The reality is it's new memories. You're going to learn new things. Yeah. And it's an adventure. So you should continue.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I can't imagine my life without, they are sort of part of my identity, but we'll see.
Yeah. You'll do what's right for you.
Yeah.
Now, I understand that you've met Eric Wenmeyer. Tell me about that.
Yeah. Eric and I are good friends.
I've never met Eric.
He's a big goofball. It's and very giving. So Eric is the first blind person to summit Mount Everest. Now, Lonnie Bedwell, I don't know if he's up on Everest right now. If he summits, he'll be the third. So I remember when I can't remember his name, the second blind person that summited Everest, Eric had to change his title to first instead of the only blind person. But
we all have to grow and change,
Yeah. So I met Eric. I think I mentioned I lost a big chunk of vision pretty much overnight. And even though I had all the skills, the tools to move on, but it kind of put me in a dark place, mostly because I was really afraid of my career, which at that moment was working the studio and gallery. And so a friend of mine, Dianka, she's from Czechoslovakia. She goes, I heard that there's this blind guy that summited Mount Everest, and his premiere of his film is showing, and I think we should
touch
go.
The top of the world, right?
Yes. And so she pretty much kidnapped me, forced me to go. And she, of course, had the best seats right up front. And I couldn't really see the screen, but I could hear everything. Mm-hmm. And then Eric and his, group of goofballs that summited with him got up on stage. And it was the first person. I mean, I had met other blind people, but it was the first person who was blind, that was alive, that became a mentor to me. Mm-hmm. And I met him afterwards because we had, the VIP ticket or whatever. And we just really hit off this friendship. Now, this is before he's the Eric Wymer is today. So you could just walk up and meet him. And I was working for actually the Stevens Johnson Syndrome Foundation, and I was putting together a fundraiser. And I said, Eric, this film would be great for me to use as a fundraiser. And I had to pay the filming rights and stuff to show the film, come up with the money, and I did. He didn't give me any favors, I didn't get any discounts. And I showed the film, and it was a huge success. And then he started asking me to volunteer for his nonprofit, which is No Barriers. And I would go do speaking gigs and, do different things for him. And a friendship grew out of that. And then there was a position open with No Barriers, and I applied and I got it, and went to work full time for him. And it was an incredible ride. They just did a big hike actually on Saturday, which I was supposed to be at, but with what's going on with my heart right now, I didn't dare. I didn't even go up to the mountain. I was thinking about, well, I'll just go up and I'll just sit at the base camp, but I didn't. It was too painful. So I usually do one hike a year with him, and but I think I might get another opportunity in August, hopefully. But yeah, he really did become a mentor of mine because I love the outdoors so much, and I really didn't know anybody who was blind or low vision that did outdoor sports until I met Eric. And then of course I met Eric, and he introduced me to everybody. And it was like, oh, again, it was like, okay, no big deal. I just have to do it a little bit differently. And so I kept doing it, and it really opened a door that I didn't even know existed. So I really, really appreciate and he's done that for thousands of people. And I shouldn't say you can't just walk up and meet him. You can, if you're in the right place at the right time. And he really is generous with his time, but he definitely has that buffer now, between himself and the general public, because he has to. He can't be there for everybody all the time. He has a lot of responsibilities with what he does. So,
well, you've had to face a lot of things in your world and in your life. How do you face your fears, and why is it important to face them?
That's a really good question. I think when you don't face your fears, it gets harder to face the next one. Where if you keep on top of them, I think it becomes a little bit easier. And so to me, if I come across things that scare me on whatever level, whether they're physically or mentally, or it could be somebody telling me, oh, you can't do that because you're blind, it makes me want to do it more, because I'm afraid if I don't face this fear, then the next one that comes along, I'm not going to be able to face that one. And so, and I do pick, I pick my battles, but, I don't think I seek out fear. I don't think I'm an adrenaline junkie, but on any level, especially compared to people like Eric and that level of athlete. But I really think that we have to keep on top of our fears, because there's so many things out there, day-to-day things that are scary, and if we don't keep that fear in check, and Michael, I mean, this, if you face a fear and you're able to break through it and learn from it and grow from it, the next one, it just doesn't seem as scary. So I feel like if I get lazy about that, I'll give in and be like, I'll let the fear take over. There was a book that came out. I didn't even read the book. It was just the title. I think it came out in the late 80s, early 90s. It was called I can't talk, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. And just the title of that book became my mantra. It's like, it's okay to be afraid. It is totally okay for me to be afraid, but to feel that and acknowledge it as a feeling, but I can go ahead and do it. Just because I'm afraid of it there's not a stop sign. It just means that I'm afraid.
I think we talked a little bit during our time on Aftersight podcast about fear. And one of the things I talked about is we're starting to write, actually, it's now at the publisher being looked at. It's called A Guide Dog's Guide to Being Brave. That's our working title. But I realized during the pandemic that what I haven't done, most of the time I've been speaking, is while I talk about not being afraid, I've not really worked to try to teach other people how to deal with fear. And I put it that way because I'm not going to say how not to be afraid, because I agree with you. Fear is part of what we do. The issue is, can we learn to control our fear? And the answer is yes, we can. And there's no question that we can learn how to not, as I call it, be blinded by fear. And that's what we need to do. So I started working on that during the pandemic. I have a friend I'm working with, Carrie Wyatt Kent. And so we've written the book, and now we're waiting to hear from the publisher what they want to edit or change or do. We've done that once, and now we're on our second shot at it, and we're working toward it. The expectation is that we can put something out, and it's called A Guide Dog's Guide to Being Brave because we base it all around the 8 guide dogs that I've had and lessons I learned from them and how they behaved. And one of them could not face fear very well, and actually created her own fear, and only worked about 18 months before having to retire because she couldn't guide anymore. She was too afraid of it. But it's a fascinating set of stories. So looking forward to that coming out. But I agree with you. It's a matter of facing fear, but learning to recognize that fear can be a very powerful, positive tool for each of us.
Yeah, I agree. I think because even rafting the Grand Canyon, I'm not a good swimmer. I'm not a big swimmer. I dog paddle. And I had never rafted in my entire life. And guess what? There's lots of in the Grand Canyon. Rattlesnakes. So but I really wanted to do it. I really, really wanted this experience. And I wanted to meet these kids from all over the United States and do this adventure with them. And it was sometimes hour by hour, and it was day by day, but I shared my fear with the kids. And at first I wasn't going to, because I was afraid to tell these high school kids, because high school kids, they can be rough on you. And especially my experience getting bullied in high school. And so I was actually afraid to tell the kids about my fears. And I talked with the other leaders on the group, and they said, you should tell them. Because I bet you these kids have fears of their own, and you're here to be their mentor. So, so if they find out
plus, if you don't, they'll see through you every time.
Absolutely. So I did. I told them about, how I lost my vision and with the rattlesnake bite, initiating the whole thing. And it was amazing. So at night, the kids, because we slept outside on Paco pads, of course, and they would put their pads around me in a circle. And they said, Miss Penn, if we feel a snake go over us, we'll yell before it gets to you. Like, I don't know if that's going to help, but
that probably isn't a good idea, but nice, but good thought nevertheless.
It was. And they shared some of the fears that they had, and that they had not shared in their paperwork, because you have to fill out a book, booklet of paperwork before you get to come. And it was amazing because they got to be vulnerable and they got to share their fears. And then the other kids got to support them, in getting over their fears. And, it was, and what ended up happening is we all learned each other's strengths and our weaknesses. And so, the really strong swimmers did the swimming, and then they taught some of us weaker ones, some of the tricks, and gave us some skills. And it ended up being a really neat thing. So I think it's okay and I think it's important to tell people when you're afraid.
Yeah.
Oh,
I agree. It's important to do that. And everyone is different. Some of us don't necessarily face fear and have negative reactions a lot. I think that's a lot of my upbringing, but some of us do. And there's no right or wrong way. It's a question, though, of what we learn with it and how we learn to address and deal with fear and challenges that we face. I'm assuming that you did not encounter any rattlesnakes in the Grand Canyon.
Not any that were alive. There was, we did a hike one day back into where this waterfall was. And I was at the back. It's called the sweeper. It's the person in the back of the pack that makes sure nobody gets left behind. And that's always my favorite role. And one of the kids came back coming to me, and I was like, "You're supposed to be going the opposite way." And they said, "Miss Penn, there's a rattlesnake up there, but it's and it's right on the side of the trail, and it's right when you get to the waterfall, but it's dead." And I said, "You could have led with it's dead."
Yeah, you could have led with dead instead.
And so it was really sweet when I got up there. They like, "Do you want to see it? It's dead." I was like, "Nope, I don't want. I don't want."
Don't need to. Had enough exposure to them already.
Never did.
Been there, done that.
But then I was standing in the pool at the bottom of the waterfall, and one of the guides, he's been a river rat forever, has probably hundreds of times rafting the Grand Canyon. He was standing near me, and I said, "What do you think killed that rattlesnake? Was its head crushed into something?" He goes, "Oh no, it probably got caught in the current above, and then when it came down the waterfall, it either got sucked under and drowned, or just the impact of it." And I said, "So there are rattlesnakes coming down the waterfall?" And he goes, "Well, it's probably rare, but yeah." And I was like, "Okay, I'm going to go stand up there."
He could have told you that it was afraid of you, but
no, they didn't mention that part.
Yeah. So what's next for Penn Street in the world?
Oh, wow. I am really, I turned 55 this year, which to some people doesn't sound old. To others, I sound ancient, but my body is definitely maybe plateauing. And so I'm really looking at these next few years of things that I really, really, really want to accomplish physically and make sure that I do those things. So, there are trips. My brother, who I mentioned, my Superman, when he passed away, my father's side of the family is from Scotland, and Tim was really proud of his Scottish roots. My mother was Cherokee Choctaw, Native American Indian, but Tim wanted his ashes taken back to Scotland. And so it's been 10 years. Next year will be 10 years. So we are going to some family and really close friends of my brother's we're going to take his ashes to Scotland. And I'm looking at different either biking trips or hiking, trails that I would like to do there. That's a really big deal to me. And then there's some big trips like that I want to accomplish in the next couple of years. And I really, really would like to raft the Grand Canyon one more time while I'm as healthy as I possibly can. So that's really what's next for me. I love working at Audio Information Network of Colorado. And I am so blessed to have such an amazing team. And Kim is such a great executive director. And so I see myself, hopefully, knock on wood here, that that's where my career will, go until I retire. But who knows? You never know what doors are going to open. And
when you go to Scotland, you'll have to go eat some haggis.
I've heard about haggis. No, thank you.
I went to New Zealand and had haggis pie. It was very tasty. Now, I don't know what was in it as opposed to what they say is in haggis, but it was very tasty. So, I'll bet it will be not so bad when you go there, you go to a restaurant and get haggis. I'll bet it won't be what. Yeah, I would try it. I think it's worth exploring. Be brave.
I will.
They won't have rattlesnake in it. I guarantee you that.
That's good. Yeah, I guess there are places that serve rattlesnake in the South, but I've never.
I had snake once. Somebody gave me a piece of snake and it tasted like chicken. There was way too much cartilage, and that was enough for me. I don't need to do it anymore. I can say I've done it.
I'm a pescatarian, I guess they call it. I'm vegetarian, but I will eat salmon, fish occasionally.
Yeah.
And, but, when you're traveling, especially abroad, you kind of need to go with the flow and open up.
You do. Give me a good piece of garlic bread any day.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Well, Penn, this has been absolutely fun, and I'm really glad we had a chance to do this, and I want to hear more about your exploits as you go forward. So we need to do this again in a year or two when you've done some of your other adventures.
Absolutely.
And I hope everyone has enjoyed this. We'd love to hear your comments. Reach out to us. But how can people reach out to you and learn more about you and what you're doing and all that kind of stuff?
Absolutely. I'm on most social media, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. You can either use my name, Penn, Penn Street, or my tagline is The Blind Chick, which came out of me running for city council, and that's another story. But The Blind Chick. And also you can reach out to me at Audio Information Network of Colorado, and find out more about what we do there. We are state-based, so if you're in Colorado, check us out. But it's Penn, Penn at aincolorado.org. So I'd love to hear from you. And
Aftersight Podcast has a website?
Yeah, it does not have a website, but you can reach it through our website, which is the aincolorado.org, or it's on everything: Apple, Spotify, Google, all of the big podcast platforms. It's Aftersight, all one word. And would love to have you check us out there as well.
Cool. Well, we appreciate you being here and telling us all that as well. And for all of you out there, go seek out Penn Street. I think it will be a treat. And she's got lots of interesting and relevant things to say, needless to say. And again, I want to thank you all for listening. Please give us a 5-star rating wherever you're listening to us. We would appreciate it. And I hope that you'll reach out to me. I'd love to hear what you think of today's episode. You can reach me at Michael, MICHAELHI, at Accessibe, ACCESSIBE.com, or at www.michaelhingson, MICHAELHINGSON.com/podcast. So we're findable, and we'd love to hear from you. Love to hear your thoughts. And Penn, for you and for anyone else listening, if you've got any thoughts of other people who we ought to have as guests, we always appreciate introductions and emails about that. So please let us know and introduce us to anyone who you think we ought to have as a guest. We'll do it. We're glad to. And once more, Penn, I want to thank you for being with us today. This has been an absolute joy.
Thank you, Michael.